All right, welcome to our sixth module on the Etruscans. The Etruscans, this is going to be a quick conversation because the Etruscans themselves play a very important role, but we don't have a whole lot of works from them. We have some very specific works, but as you'll find out, how the civilization sort of rose and then shrank and sort of just went away will be due to that of Rome. So we'll just kind of jump into this, but it will be a quick talk. So the Etruscans themselves, judging by the timeline, they had a substantial role. Um, what's amazing is that they were the power to be uh, before Rome even came about, and they're living in the same areas of Italy. They lived more in the um, western central sort of side. We think of like the Tuscany area, where Rome was going to be a little bit farther south. However, that the Etruscans they found Rome, right? They're the ones who really sort of are the beginning of the development of it as a city. So, and Rome has its own mythologies, how it was founded. And when we get to Rome, you're going to see some of the influences in the earlier work from the Etruscans on the Romans themselves. But um, it's really interesting because the Etruscans themselves were master navigators of the sea. There's evidence that they've made it all the way up to Ireland, of course, all over the Mediterranean, extensive trade. And that's what they were interested in. They were interested in trade, not so much war. They were not a warrior group and a warrior base. In fact, they really didn't even have like military defenses in the scheme of what you would think of for a civilization that's trading and doing. They're very content with what they were able to do. So what happens is that they live alongside the Romans. In fact, they're even near the Greeks. But alongside the Romans, they're the ones who sort of like organize. They're the first kings of Rome. They're the ones who sort of establish the groundwork, and eventually Rome just kind of pushes them out, but doesn't have to like conquer them in the way of like brutality like we think of. So they're very advanced in their ability to mine and use metals, as we're going to see. They make bronze, which is a combination of tin and copper. But they're very agriculture, and like I said, they're heavy on trade. So um, they're working a lot on their economy, not so much on their military. So let's look a little bit at their metalwork. What you see here are examples of what's called repoussé, which is sort of like a relief pounding of the metal to build up the image, the textures, and such. And then they also use what was called granulation. Granulation is imagine taking like a bunch of ball bearings and then adhering them to a surface. That's the same sort of thing that they would do to sort of build up textures. And you can't see it as well, but that granulation is right here on the edges of the sort of like flowery work that's going on. It creates a different texture. But they understand how to sort of fuse these metals and work with them. So it's really impressive, uh, the pieces that survive. Uh, we haven't really seen a whole lot of metalworks, and so it's really important to know that their advancements in this really are what other cultures feed off of. We know these because of the tombs that they made, and your lists um, there of films, the YouTube list there on their Moodle shell. There's a very short list. I think there's only three, and on there, I want you to sort of check out to see what they are, because they really create like these cities of the dead, these cities that mimic their cities of life, but it's these these mountains or these little tiny hills, and we're going to talk about those in a second. So. Um, what it's interesting is when you look in the center of this is, and I put in the notes, is like there's definitely what looks to be like sort of a link to Mesopotamia, right? The lions that would have been on the Ishtar gates, or when we think of like the Babylonian lions and the faces and stuff on them. So it's really interesting to me that so maybe there's some influences there. I'm not sure if lions were really a part of the Italian landscape. So if they weren't, especially around this time, then we'd have to assume that these are images that are being appropriated. Um, but yeah, like I said, these pieces were placed in large tombs that were built for entire families. The dead, they are cremated, and their ashes are in a sarcophagus. These large tombs are decorated with paint and stucco relief, and I'll show you those here in a second. Um, they're really defined by their archaic period, and this is sort of the height of Etruscan society. This is where architecture is inspired by the Greeks and how the Greeks were building. It was very similar. However, we don't have a whole lot of examples of their work because they were using wood. They had primary sources of wood, and so their pillars that were very much like the Doric columns that the Greeks would use, those being made out of wood, of course, were either burned, looted, rotted. I mean, they just wouldn't have survived over time. But we do have the bases left. So there are some Etruscan cities left, and what you see is a stone base that would have been mounted to. But most of their structures would have been made out of wood. Um, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about these sculptures, that these sarcophagus really. And the pieces are primarily made out of terracotta or reddish clay. So that shows you that they have a really great diversity. I mean, they can work wood, they can do clay, they're doing metal, so they have a lot of technologies going. So that would give you a glimpse of their society. Um, we can see a very strong similarity to the Egyptians when we think of not only a male and female representation, but sort of the postures, how the faces, sort of there's a stylization, but they're adding some lifelike qualities here. What I really love is how they're sort of like trying to animate. They have this flowing hair. It's not just stagnant and going one position, but it's moving. I mean, look at the gestures in the hands, right? There's trying, they're trying to get some details, but some anatomy in there. Now, what is really interesting about the Etruscan life is that uh, women were the same status as men. And so what we're seeing here is a man and a wife sort of on this couch, which you think like, oh, well, that's really romantic. But really, when the court meetings were held, um, in Greek society, it was only men. Women were never allowed into those meetings. And usually what happened, the men would lay around on couches, and the only women that are around in there were basically brought in as concubines and as servants and stuff like that. And yeah, you can imagine a sort of like a gentleman's club attitude towards it. And it was just men speaking about the laws and stuff. Well, in Etruscan society, the women were a part of those meetings. And so you can imagine a Greek would have been appalled by coming in and seeing the wives with the men on the couches enjoying that same sort of meeting and festivity. But they're also allowed to talk. So what we're seeing here is that sort of the man and the woman sort of like gesturing as if they are participating in the societal debates and stuff going on. So that's what's really important about it. And the role of women, right, was never underplayed. All right, so the tombs themselves, what you're looking at here is not actual real artifacts. All this is stucco relief. So you can imagine going into this. It looks like a mound of earth, kind of like imagine a cellar, right? Like maybe your grandparents or great grandparents or something. Maybe at a cellar, you've seen pictures of them, right? A little door that you go into this mound of earth, and in there is then these rooms or room. That had, whether it's niches for the sarcophagi in here, but in there they would contain all the items in a sort of relief sculptural format that the people may need in the afterlife. So this was like a home for them to live and converse. So they needed these tools and materials and all this stuff. So they're highly decorated, highly ornate, and that's what's really sort of interesting about how they go about uh, sort of remembering their dead, but how they think of the afterlife. So these homes of the dead were built, and there's next another ones that make up really a city of the dead. Um, like a modern cemetery, they were close to one another, and a family could share one for generations. So really impressive. Kumali is one of the sites you can check out. I may even have some Google Earth coordinates to it, but this gives you that idea of what a city of the dead would look like. Some are earthbound, some are carved out of the limestone. Um, they have this, the dirt for the roof, right? But they could be a little subterranean, depending on the materials that are around. But like I said, lavishly decorated, and this just kind of gives you a sense of the scale. You can't go visit these, and these are really our last representations that we know of the Etruscans that still survive. So there are pieces and such, there are lots of pieces in museums. More or less because the Romans, when they conquered people, they were like a sponge. They just didn't go around destroying things. They really absorbed them into their own culture. So that's how some of this stuff has survived. As we move out of the Archaic period, we have these Etruscan kings, and they've been, by this time now, Rome has decided, like, hey, we're going to do our own thing. And so they've been expelled, and then, of course, Rome would later attack, what they surrendered, more or less. And that would just be the end of the Etruscan society, right? They were just sort of absorbed. But Rome being so much sort of like an infant and they didn't really have like their own specific traditions. They didn't have their own. They just sponged. Once again, they'll do this with the Greeks and all the Greek cities that are there in Italy. When they remove them, right, they're going to keep their artisans. They're going to keep the potters, but they're going to keep that technology. So we may see a decline in the sort of what's going on in the Etruscan society, but we see it sort of live on in some regards in the Roman society. So what we have and what I put here is, this is a very famous statue of Romulus and Remus, and this is called the Capitoline Wolf. And Romulus and Remus are the two brothers that are raised by the she-wolf in this legend, and those are the brothers that find Rome. Now, similar to Cain and Abel, Romulus kills Remus, and there's more of the tale with it. But this sculpture is very much Etruscan. If we went back to the jewelry piece, and I'll just flip back to it really quickly, right? We can see these lions and these sort of depictions. You can see the stylization stuff going on there, and we see that a similar stylization as they sort of like chip away to say, well, this is the hair and stuff. It's, like I said, highly stylized. Yet these two figures are something that we think of more when we think of like Roman art that's very similar to Greek art that inspires then the Renaissance and such. So it's really interesting that a symbol of Rome, one of the biggest symbols of Rome in their beginning, is an Etruscan art piece. During the Hellenistic sort of period of their society, it's important to note that we see a lot of triumphal arches being built, and this relies on the keystone. We're going to talk a lot more about these. This is another feature that Romans love, and they do a lot of triumphant arches. These arches are they're not invented by the Etruscans, but we see them used really by the Romans. The Romans are the ones who perfect them, I guess is the best way to say. So we're really getting closer to the end. And what's interesting, I'm going to show this last one of this last sarcophagi, right? They're still using that sarcophagi and that tradition, but what we're seeing is, one, it's low relief. We're seeing a little bit somber attitude, right? It's like the people know that, they're going away, not only in death, but as a culture. So, like I said, this unit on Etruscans is very quick. I implore you to check out those videos because they're going to be really helpful in sort of putting these pieces together. But it's just good to know that this civilization is a bridge into Rome. So we got to talk about it so we can really talk about how Rome gets its